Greetings from True Roost Tales. The story for tonight takes you on a brave and compassionate journey. Where are you from? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspirational tales. A poor guy offers his last $5 to a homeless woman and finds a life-altering surprise. On a chilly December night in 1993, in the peaceful streets of the south side of Chicago, as the freezing wind howled against his creaking apartment door, 28-year-old Evan Miller, a struggling mechanic, gave his last $5 to a weak, shivering woman outside a petrol station by dawn. When Evan woke up, he discovered a blood-stained envelope with a message inside that said, "Thank you, but you shouldn't have done that." Evan had relocated to Chicago a year earlier in an attempt to get away from the memories of his childhood in St. Louis, where his father, a distinguished police officer, had vanished when he was a little lad, leaving a path of heartache and mystery in his wake. Evan now barely made ends meet, but his generosity frequently overcame him. That evening, when he gave the desperate woman his last $5, he gave it to her without question, and up to this point, the bloody envelope wasn't the only item left at his door. Evan hesitated before opening a small, unmarked black box that was lying on the floor, its edges coated with grime. His hands were shaking as he took it up, and he could smell the subtle copper scent, remembering his father's cautions about putting your trust in strangers during times of need, yet curiosity, a silver key, and a folded map with the words, "Follow carefully, you've started something you can't undo," were found inside the box. As Evan gazed at the mysterious contents, his phone rang, a landline he didn't often use, and when he answered, a raspy voice whispered that the woman he had helped wasn't who she appeared to be. If you want answers, Evan's mind raced. Was this some elaborate prank, a cruel ploy by someone who knew about his financial difficulties, or had he walked into something far more dangerous? "Meet me at the corner of Ashland and 47th at midnight, and don't tell anyone." The map showed a route leading to an abandoned warehouse, one that stirred a faint, unsettling memory of stories his father used to tell him about Chicago's underbelly. Unable to ignore the gravity of the situation, Evan resolved to go, but not before locking the box and its contents in his closet. As midnight approached, he grabbed his old baseball bat, the only weapon he owned, and made his way to the dark intersection. The street lights flickered ominously, and the air felt heavier than usual. When Evan arrived, he spotted a figure in a long trench coat standing motionless under the faint glow of a street lamp. The figure turned, revealing a face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. Before Evan could speak, the man thrust a photo into his hands. The photo made his heart stop. It was the homeless woman he'd helped, but behind her stood his father, alive, older, and wearing the same police badge he'd thought was buried with him. The man in the trench coat whispered, "You've uncovered something buried." For decades, if you want to save her and maybe find out the truth about him, you need to make a choice, but know this: not everyone is who they claim to be. And with that, the man disappeared into the shadows, leaving Evan clutching the photo and a mounting sense of dread. Evan stood in the cold Chicago night, the photograph trembling in his hands. His father alive. The thought clashed violently against the narrative he'd lived with for over 2 decades. His father, Richard Miller, had been declared dead when Evan was just 9. The official story claimed a tragic accident during a routine investigation had taken his life, but his mother always whispered her doubts late at night when she thought Evan wasn't listening. Evan's chest tightened. The woman he'd helped, frail and destitute, was somehow tied to this impossible truth, and the man in the trench coat's ominous warning lingered in his ears: not everyone is who they claim to be. The following day, Evan was unable to concentrate at work, because his mind was racing with questions about who the homeless woman was, why his father was in that picture, and what he had unintentionally walked into. By the end of his shift, he felt like a shadow of himself, exhausted but determined. Evan searched his closet for the enigmatic black box and map, carefully examining each line and marking in an attempt to find something that could explain this chaos. The route on the map took him to a location that made him feel cold. Evan recognized the address, 3419 West Curland Avenue, right away, because his father used to drive by it every Saturday on their way to buy baseball gloves from a local business and never stop here. Richard had consistently stated that it was not a secure place, but his cautions had always been evasive and dismissed in a fatherly manner, which prevented more inquiries. When he arrived to the old building on West Cortlandt that evening, the recollection stung and Evans's determination stiffened. If this location contained the answers, he had to go. The building towered over him. Its windows were broken, its walls were covered in faded graffiti, and the air was heavy with decay and the faint drip of water making it difficult to breathe. He gripped the black box tightly as he pushed the door open. Its hinges were eerily silent, save for the faint echo of distant water, and the photo showed the homeless woman once more, but this time she was grinning softly, almost maternally, and next to her was a small boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with wild brown hair and eyes that looked eerily familiar. Evans's heart lurched. The boy was him. The note was brief but devastating. "She saved you once, now it's your turn to save her." As he held the picture to his chest, Evan's hands trembled and memories he had long suppressed came flooding back. He remembered a good woman who used to come to his house when his mother was at her lowest, providing food and warmth when they had none. He had never known her name, but she had always referred to him as Little Evan. Was it her, and could it be the same woman? A sudden sound startled him out of his reverie. Slow, deliberate footsteps reverberated through the warehouse, and Evan spun around, his heart pounding like a drum. He called out, and from the shadows came a tall, broad figure wearing a hood that covered their face. The figure held a small box that resembled the one he had found on his doorstep. They placed it on the ground and slid it toward him before retreating back into the darkness. Without saying anything, Evan hesitated before picking it up, his breath shallow, and discovered 2 photographs inside the box, one of his father and the other of the homeless woman, both of whom were smiling and younger than he had ever seen. On the back of the locket was an engraving commemorating Our Little Miracle. Evan always loves his parents. Evan's parents' knees buckled. His mother was the homeless woman. His mother's tears ran down his cheeks as the moment's weight overcame him. If this were true, why had she disappeared? Why had she been living on the streets? And why had his father disappeared, leaving behind a son who was always in pain for him? A soft, familiar voice reverberated throughout the warehouse. "Evan, I apologize. I didn't want you to know that way." Evan spun around, gasping, and saw that the homeless woman standing beneath the flickering light had changed. She looked cleaner, stronger, and had a look that could only be described as maternal. The words hit his throat. "Mum." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "There's a lot you don't know, but if you're ready, I'll tell you everything about your father, about me, and why we had to leave you." Then, from the darkness, a deeper, more worn but recognizable voice spoke. "Son, it's time for you to discover the truth." Evan looked around and saw his father, Richard Miller. He appeared older, his face etched with years of adversity, but his piercing blue eyes, which Evan had inherited, were unmistakably his father's. Evan stood frozen, the weight of the moment bearing down on him like a tidal wave. Evan's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and incredulity. Richard gave a nod. Evan's mind reeled. "Protect me from what you left us. Mom disappeared. I grew up believing I was nothing to either of you." His mother approached, her voice soft and trembling. "I know this is overwhelming, son, but you must hear the truth. I didn't abandon you. I was forced to leave to protect you. I was investigating a powerful crime syndicate at the time that had infiltrated law enforcement. They knew I was getting too close to exposing them when they couldn't reach me, so they came after your mother and you." Evan's knees threatened to give out. "So you just vanished and left me to fend for myself. Do you know what that did to me?" "Evan, it wasn't like that. There were dangerous people who wanted us dead if we stayed. If we had stayed, you would have also been a target." Richard took over. His mother's voice cracked as she answered, "We believed that was the only way to protect you." Richard's jaw tightened, "And I had to go underground. I've spent the last 20 years trying to bring them down, but it's not over yet, Evan, and they're still out there, and now they know you've been dragged into this." Evan's heart raced as he processed their words. "So this blood-stained envelope, the map, and everything else is part of their game. I didn't mean for it to last this long. I tried to watch over you from a distance, but life on the streets wasn't what I anticipated." Richard nodded and added, "They've been watching you to see how far you'd go, and they're trying to use you to draw me out." Evan tightened his fists, his sadness and wrath churning inside him. Why should he come now? After all this time, his mother put a shaking hand on his shoulder because they were growing closer, more dangerous than before, and we had to confront them head-on as we were no longer able to run. This is all I've learned about them, and Richard took a weathered file out of his coat. Names, locations, and activities. It's sufficient to stop them, but I need your assistance because I can't do it by myself. Son, we're not pleading with you for forgiveness, but if you don't help, more lives will be destroyed, and if they succeed, they'll come for you next. Evan stared at the file, the weight of his father's words sinking in. You want me to risk my life for a family that abandoned me? His mother's eyes were full of tears. Richard came forward with a look of desperation and resolve on his face. I failed you once, and I won't do it again, but I can't make this right without you, he said. Evan gave them a look. Evan's heart was broken, and his parents, whom he had assumed were gone forever, were standing in front of him, asking him to enter a world he didn't want to be a part of, but deep down, a spark of hope flickered. For years, he had yearned for answers and closure, and now he had to make a decision. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him, saying, if I do this, it's not for you, it's to end this nightmare for good. His father nodded, his face hardening with resolve, and they wouldn't see us coming. And as the three of them entered the chilly Chicago night, Evan couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a battle he wasn't sure he was prepared for, but for the first time in years, he wasn't facing it alone.